The sun over Palo Alto was too bright for a day like this. Its light spilled across the field, blinding, almost cruel, bouncing off the sea of red robes that shimmered in the June heat. The air buzzed with camera shutters, laughter, proud tears, all the sounds of 1,000 people being seen. I stood among them, clutching the smooth edge of my diploma, smiling because that's what everyone does when their name is called. Nora Dunn. The announcer's voice echoed through the speakers, clear, confident. My feet moved forward automatically, the tassel brushing against my cheek. For 1 second, I looked toward the front row where the family-reserved signs gleamed under the sunlight. 2 seats carried my parents' names, Mr. and Mrs. Dunn, written in looping black ink. Both seats were empty. The tags fluttered with each breeze like wings too tired to fly. Around them, every other family cheered, shouted, waved banners with glittering letters. I imagined my mother's perfectly manicured hand holding a camera, my father's voice shouting my name, but they weren't here. They were 600 miles away in Texas, watching my younger sister compete in a pageant. I smiled for the crowd, for the cameras, for the dean handing me the diploma, a perfect daughter, perfectly alone. My heart didn't break this time. It simply went quiet. When I stepped down from the stage, the wind caught my gown, and the 2 name cards in the front row fluttered again, almost like applause. That was when I understood something I hadn't dared to before. Sometimes silence isn't absence. It's truth, standing in plain sight. And this time I was ready to let it speak. Redwater was the kind of Texas town where people waved even if they didn't like you, where Sunday service attendance mattered more than confession, and where the Ray family name was still whispered with nostalgia. My mother, Darlene Ray Dunn, used to be Redwater's crown jewel, literally. Miss Lone Star Regional 1996. Her pageant photos still hung on the walls of the diner framed beside old rodeo posters. Every waitress who'd known her called me her smart one, as if beauty and brains were 2 boxes that couldn't share the same shelf. I grew up in the echo of that crown. My little sister Sable was born for it. Long lashes. Natural grace, that rare kind of poise people confuse with worth. Mom coached her in posture and smile placement the way other parents taught math. I used to watch them from the hallway mirror, Sable balancing a book on her head while Mom clapped, beaming. Perfect chin-up, sweetheart. People love confidence. If I walked in with a report card full of A's, Mom barely looked up. You're lucky, Nora, she'd say. Not everyone has brains. Sable has her light, you have yours. I used to wonder what that meant until I realized it was her polite way of saying I wasn't the pretty one. Dad Caleb tried to stay neutral. He ran the local auto shop, fixed people's cars, and kept peace the way small-town men do by saying as little as possible. He wasn't cruel, just quiet, which sometimes hurt more. When I got into Stanford, Mom threw a dinner at the diner, complete with dollar store balloons and her practiced pageant smile. But when I told her it was law school, not broadcast journalism, her enthusiasm dimmed. Law, she said, blinking. Honey, that's impressive. But don't you want something lighter? I remember laughing, even though something in me cracked. Lighter. Fun, Nora, she said, pressing her hand to mine. You've always been so serious. Years later, when the email about my graduation went out, I added her and Dad to the top of the list, along with hotel reservations and flight details. It felt like an olive branch. She replied within the hour, Sweetheart Sable's state pageant falls that weekend. You understand, right? That line, you understand, wasn't a question. It never was. It was a reminder of my role in our family, the one who wouldn't make a scene. That night I stared at the blinking cursor on my screen, hovering over the reply box. For the first time, I didn't write back. The night after that email, Palo Alto's air felt heavier than usual. Not from fog, but from something that pressed against my chest and refused to move. My apartment overlooked a row of oak trees and the faint glow of the library dome. From my window, I could see people celebrating the end of finals, their laughter spilling down the street like music I wasn't invited to. I sat at my desk, the invitation list for graduation open on the screen. My cursor blinked beside my mother's name, as if waiting for me to delete it. Instead, I opened a blank document and began to type. I told myself it was just a speech, something I might read at the ceremony. But as the words poured out, I realized it was a letter, one I would never send. Dear Mom and Dad, you used to tell me that being on stage takes courage. That smiling through fear is what makes a winner. I finally understand that now, but maybe not in the way you meant. This stage I'm about to walk across isn't lit by spotlights. It's lit by truth. I paused, staring at the words. They sounded dramatic, maybe too much, but the ache in my chest said they were honest. I kept typing. I won't ask you to come anymore. I'm done competing for your applause. I just hope someday you see me without the crown, without the trophies, and realize I was still worth showing up for. I saved it under a file name only I would recognize Stay Whole. That phrase came from my grandfather, Judge Everett Dunn, the only person who ever made me believe that stillness could be strength. When I was little, he used to say, "Nora, the world will try to cut you in half, don't let it. Stay whole even when it hurts." His voice echoed in my head as the rain began tapping against the glass. I printed the letter and folded it into my notebook, a quiet secret. Not a plea, not a threat, just a reminder to myself that love should never feel like begging. The next morning, I carried on like nothing happened. I went to class, turned in my final paper, smiled at classmates making travel plans with their families. Nobody noticed the faint outline of that folded page pressing against my bag, the only thing keeping me from falling apart. Graduation day arrived like a promise I already knew would be broken. The morning light spilled across the quad, too bright, too hopeful. My classmates gathered with their families wrapped in Stanford red and pride. The air smelled of sunscreen flowers, and joy the kind that never seemed meant for me. Liam met me at the gate with 2 coffees. "Ready?" he asked, trying for casual. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I nodded. Ready enough. As the ceremony began, sunlight shimmered across rows of waving parents and crying babies. I searched the crowd even though I already knew. 2 seats in the front row bore white cards, Mr. and Mrs. Dunn. The wind curled their corners like old photographs. When my name was called, Liam's whistle cut through the noise, but the world blurred. Each step toward the stage felt endless and fleeting at once, the kind of walk you remember forever, but never want again. The dean shook my hand, said something I didn't hear, and pressed the diploma into my palm. It felt heavier than paper should, like it carried every moment I'd waited to be seen. I glanced again at the front row. The 2 empty chairs gleamed under the sun, undeniable. Around me, joy roared. My silence roared louder. After the ceremony, while graduates took photos, I stood beneath a tree with Liam and my grandfather Everett, who'd flown in despite his frailty. His hand was steady as he gave me a small box. Inside lay a silver bookmark engraved with 2 words, "Stay Whole." He smiled. "You didn't need an audience, Nora. You just needed to finish your story." That night, my cousin Emma posted a photo of me beside the 2 empty chairs, my robe lifted by the wind. She captioned it, "2 seats saved. None taken." By morning, it had spread through Redwater like wildfire. For the first time, my family's silence wasn't invisible. It was undeniable. The post reached home faster than any rumor. When I woke, my phone glowed with notifications. By noon, Mom's name lit the screen. I almost ignored it, then answered, "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Her voice cut through the line, sharp and controlled. "Good morning to you too," I said softly. "You embarrassed this family. That photo made you look pitiful." "I didn't post it," I said. "Emma did." "You should have told her to take it down." "I didn't ask her to put it up," I replied. But she saw what everyone else saw, 2 empty chairs. A pause. Then, in her practiced pageant tone, she said, "You're being dramatic. You know why we couldn't come." "Yes," I said. "I understand. You told me to." Her breath caught. "You've always been so sensitive. Everything's not about you." I almost laughed. "You're right, Mom. It never was." The silence that followed stretched raw and final. I could hear her trying to find something to say. I didn't help her. Finally, she muttered, "People in town are talking." "I know," I said. "Maybe that's what it takes for you to listen." Before she could respond, I ended the call. My hands trembled not from fear, but release. That afternoon, Liam handed me a glass of iced tea and sat beside me on the porch. He didn't ask about the call. "Feels lighter, doesn't it?" he said. I nodded. "It does." For the first time, I realized the pain hadn't come from being unseen. It came from always trying to earn the right to be. And maybe now I finally stopped auditioning for love. A week after that call, I found a small postcard slipped under my apartment door. The handwriting was familiar, uneven, and careful, my father's. "Flying to Palo Alto for work. Can we talk, Dad?" He'd never written to me before. Not a card, not a note, not even a post-it. For a moment, I just stared at the ink, wondering what for work really meant. But something inside me said to let him come. We met at a cafe near the hospital where Liam was doing his rotation. Dad arrived early, sitting at the corner table, his hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. He looked smaller somehow, his hair grayer, His shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. "Nora," he said when I walked in, and the word came out soft, uncertain. "Hey, Dad!" I sat across from him. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed a deep, weary sound. "Your mother's been upset. Says you made us look bad." "Did I asked." He looked down at his hands. "No, we did that ourselves." I didn't expect that answer. He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my eyes. "I should have gone to your graduation. I didn't want to fight with her. You know how she gets when she thinks someone's choosing sides." I wanted to be angry, but all I felt was tired. "You always think silence keeps the peace," I said quietly. "But it doesn't. It just makes the noise louder for the rest of us." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "You sound like your granddad." I smiled a little. He taught me well. He reached into his pocket and slid a folded newspaper clipping across the table. It was the photo Emma had posted printed in the Redwater Gazette. Underneath it a headline, "Stanford graduate from Redwater inspires town with quiet strength." "They ran this last Sunday," he said. "Your mom refused to look at it." I traced the edge of the page, feeling something uncoil in my chest. "You came all this way to tell me that?" He shook his head. "No. I came to say I'm proud of you, even if I didn't have the courage to show it sooner." I met his gaze, and for once neither of us looked away. When we left the cafe, the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of coffee and rain. I didn't know if we could ever fix what was broken, but maybe, just maybe, silence wasn't our only language anymore. The world eventually stopped talking about the photo. Redwater found new gossip to chase. But for me, the quiet that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was peace. I'd moved into a small apartment overlooking the bay where sunsets turned the walls gold. Work at the courthouse filled my days. I liked its rhythm, the hum of printers, the soft shuffle of files, the quiet gravity of justice being done. Sometimes when a young clerk stumbled, I caught myself whispering my grandfather's words, "Stay whole." One evening, an email arrived from a local women's group inviting me to speak at an event called Defining Strength. My first instinct was to decline. I'd never been comfortable with stages. But then I thought of that girl on the Stanford lawn standing before 2 empty chairs, and I knew exactly what I'd say. A week later, I faced a small audience of women teachers, nurses, mothers, all looking for something to hold on to. I told them strength doesn't always sound loud. Sometimes it's just finishing what you start even when no one claps. Sometimes it's learning to stop performing for love. When I stepped down, I saw my father waiting near the exit, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes wet but proud. He didn't speak, just nodded once. That silent gesture meant more than any applause. That night, I reopened the old file on my laptop, Stay Whole, and reread the letter I'd written months ago but never sent. This time I added one last line. "You were right, Grandpa. The world will try to split you in two, but if you stand in your truth long enough, it becomes your armor." I saved the file, closed the laptop, and stepped onto the balcony. The city lights flickered across the bay like soft applause from a universe that had finally gone quiet. I didn't need to be seen anymore. I had already seen myself, and that was enough. A few months later, I returned to Redwater for the first time since graduation. The town looked smaller. Its diner windows fogged my mother's old pageant posters, fading under glass. For once, they didn't sting. Grandpa Everett's house sat at the end of Magnolia Lane, still facing the sunset. He was gone now, passed peacefully in his sleep, but the air around that porch still felt like him, steady, warm, unshakable. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and dust. On the table by the window waited a sealed envelope with my name in his careful handwriting. Inside was a single page with 2 words, "Stay whole." I stood there for a long while, watching the last light settle on the floorboards. It wasn't grief that filled me, it was calm. I realized I'd never truly stood alone. I'd been carrying his voice the whole time. Before leaving, I walked through town. People waved from porches, just like always. But something in me had changed. Maybe I'd stopped needing them to know who I was. When I reached the edge of town, the horizon was painted in gold. I whispered into the warm air, "I'm whole, Grandpa." I stayed whole. Then I drove on, not looking back. Some stories don't end with applause, they end with truth. And as the road stretched open ahead, glowing in the same golden light that once fell on 2 empty chairs, I realized for the first time nothing was missing.